Obviously, putting in a nice big kitchen is a key factor when remodeling a house or rebuilding one. But even if things don't go well and your food room ends up not being one of your favorite parts of the house, food room, I like that, you still need to make room for a coffee pot or a coffee maker or both. And there's only one brand you should be dumping in that pot or that maker or what have you to brew the good stuff. It's Sparkplug Coffee. They provide Canadian and American customers with beans that are of the premium variety, so Sparkplug is helping you make the best coffee you can possibly imagine. Brew it the best, you country folks, or city folks who don't really belong out there in the country. I said something about Canadians and Americans a few sentences ago, and that's because only they can get bags sent within a week. Sorry to someone who resides in Europe or something. But I'm not sorry to say that we Canadian dwellers get free shipping. So it's convenient and affordable, and it's a lot cheaper than getting takeout from a chain every day. But join the Autopilot Coffee Club and make it even easier on yourself. Sparkplug allows people to pause or even cancel anytime it becomes necessary. Go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES for more. Applying our HYES promo code will win you a one-time 20% discount. So that's the Sparkplug Coffee section. Cary and Myrna are waiting on me. Let's do the thing. And action. Have you ever seen Mr. Blandings builds his dream house? Hi there, movie monkeys, and welcome to another podcast here on Have You Ever Seen? This is episode number 684 of this classic movies chit-chat. I'm Ryan. I don't think it's likely I'll ever get to live in a dream house. Ellis, not very likely at all. My wife Bev isn't here for this one because she never is on Fridays, but she will be back for Monday's podcasting extravaganza. With her, or when it's just me on my own, films from long ago are reviewed every Monday, and as of today, I'm back to posting solo shows every other Friday. I took the summer off, and it was nice not to have to spend so much time in the edit chair. Because of the never-ending scorchingly hot days, though, I didn't spend as much time outside as I wanted. My hammock didn't get me in it too often, but I did have more time for me, more me time. Okay, so today's movie. Jimmy's Dream House was released, not Barbie's Dream House, but Jimmy's, was released by RKO through David Selznick's production company 77 years ago, and a few months, I guess, on June 4th, 1948. It came out 9 or 10 months after The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, which involved many of the same people, including the two stars, Cary Grant and Myrna Loy. And just like the one they did with Shirley Temple in 47, Mr. Blandings was a hit. People like seeing the disaster that'll unfold when a man and his wife try to build the ideal domicile in a zany rom-com. To give a brief plot description, as I always do at this point in the podcast, H.C. Potter directs a script by Norman Panama and Melvyn Frank, who are adapting Eric Hodgins's book of the same name. Cary Grant plays Jim Blandings and Myrna Loy is his wife Muriel. They're doing pretty well living in New York City, but they live in a very small apartment with their two preteen daughters. So they cull together their finances, and then Mr. and Mrs. Blandings, well, guess, it's the name of the movie. It's the name of the movie. And just like the Tom Hanks Shelley Long movie, The Money Pit, their hopes that they can have it all don't work out so well. The problems are numerous in the next few months, and their dream becomes very expensive. Or in a nutshell, Ad Man goes nearly mad, man, after deciding to move to the country. Okay, not the greatest. All right, so The Dream House does very well on Rotten Tomatoes. 86% of critics and 76% of audiences say they like it. There are only 21 reviews by the critics on there, 21. But 18 of them reported that they got pleasure out of this motion picture. So much pleasure. Now, maybe their reviews aren't among those 21, but Bosley Crowther and the Time magazine reviewer said very nice things about the film. How about ticket sales? Well, I'm not sure specifically how well Mr. Blandings did, but Wikipedia does list a bona fide classic and a film that we reviewed, Red River, as the number 2 movie of 1948. I guess one of Scorsese's all-time favorites, The Red Shoes, was number 1. I knew people like Marty think highly of that one these days, but I didn't know it was so popular back then, too. Red Shoes, Red River, number 1, number 2. Oscar nominations for Blandings? No, sir. But Norman Panama and Melvyn Frank were up for the Best Written American Comedy at the Writers Guild Awards. Sitting Pretty, starring Maureen O'Hara and Robert Young, won that trophy. As far as American Film Institute representation, this tomfoolery was up for only one list, and it made it, ranking 72nd on the top 100 laughs. And since that's all I have for plaudits and kudos and lists, let's just get into the story right now. Why waste any more time? Melvyn Douglas's voice is the first thing we hear. He's Bill Cole, Jim Blandings' chum. Bill does a voiceover to set the scene. It's September and we're in Manhattan, New York, USA. He's pretty dramatic about all that. Then they pan over my favorite part of the apple, Central Park, which is hard not to do when you show an overhead of the city, but I always love seeing that park, so I had to comment on it now. Man, Central Park. A big theme in the opening here is they let us know how crowded and busy it is in a city of, what did they say, 7 million people? Although the population about 80 years later is only about 8.5 million. I looked it up yesterday. I would have thought the number would balloon a lot more than that in what is pretty close to a century. Although I guess there's only so much room, especially on the island, Manhattan. Although from what I saw, that number is for all the boroughs, not just Manhattan. I guess you could argue one reason the city isn't even more crowded now is that people moved in the last few decades because they've been priced out for the past 20 or 30 years. Which is in a way what happens to the Blandings is. If they want a big house, they're not doing it in Manhattan or any part of New York City. But anyway, one of the charms of New York is in fact just how many people are always there. That city that never sleeps label is not BS. Go downtown in the middle of the night and you'll see plenty of people milling around. You don't really see that in Toronto so much, maybe on the weekends. But on a Thursday or a Monday night or something like that at 3 a.m, no way. Ghost town, really, considering it's such a big city. Now, because of that, though, I can understand why someone will want to move away to enjoy more space. We're not as busy as they are, but still, Toronto is bustling a lot of the time, too. And there are times I wish I was back in the country where I grew up, instead of dealing with so many human beings. The traffic alone is one reason I want to bail on this city sometimes. We have good friends who did that. They used to live about 5 minutes away from us. Then they bought a house outside Ottawa right around the time we bought this place. For those who don't know, Ottawa is the capital city of this country, and it's about 5 hours away from here in a car. Back to Blandings. During these visuals, director Potter uses a sped-up frame rate to make people seem even more frantic than they really are. Comedy, baby. That's been a trope a lot, isn't it? The sped-up comedy thing. I guess no one used it more than Benny Hill, was it? That guy. Then Melvyn stops doing the voiceover so he can appear on camera and talk directly to it, telling us that he's Jim Blandings' lawyer and his best friend. I hadn't seen this movie in well over 20 years, so I don't remember much beyond the basic plot, but Melvyn D really is the third lead in this. He's not just in the movie, he's a big part of it. He's got a prominent spot in the poster, and he has close to as much screen time as Cary and Myrna do. Dude's always around, plus there's that romantic subplot with him and Muriel that I didn't like very much. More on that later. I'm building up the things I'm going to talk about later. Promoting things I will say, and a thing where I'm saying things. But enough about Bill for now. Our first glimpse of Jim and Muriel is them asleep in their apartment. They battle over the alarm going off at 7:30 in the morning, which is between them because they sleep in separate beds. I think I questioned in a recent episode if people really did that back then, or if it was just a movie and TV thing that they slept in different beds like this. And I forget the episode it came up in, and I forget what I said, and I probably looked it up, but I did look it up this time, and I guess they didn't. That was just a movie thing, censors and stuff. It's one thing for Hollywood to censor that people had sex. But when they're married and have kids, come on. I think audiences understand these people would share a bed. Anyway, Jim has a tiny closet where he can barely get at his clothes, and there's really just not a ton of space in this place at all for his 2 kids, his wife, and himself. They all even have to share a cramped bathroom, and hijinks ensue when stuff falls off the shelf as Jim tries to brush his teeth. Because, baby, you need to realize there needs more space. They're gonna hit this on the head the next couple minutes. Jimmy hops in the shower, which at least starts out deadly cold, causing both him and then Muriel, when she takes her shower, to go, "Oh, home on the range." That was moderately clever. Showering in the morning is something I always do too, but Jim is certainly not like me in this way, because he shaves after he showers. Sure, you get steam to open up your pores like that, but it is harder to see the mirror. Plus, you can't take advantage of the shower washing extraneous shaving cream off your neck. Anyway, that's how I do it. Husband and wife continue to struggle to do their wake-up things in their little bathroom. Then breakfast is more of the same, because their dining room is also a bit miniature. And conversation during the breaking of the fast with their daughters, Joan and Betsy, gets political, especially concerning the young'uns' views about the evils of capitalism. The girls were socially awakened even back in 1948. No one told them it was supposed to happen maybe about 10 years ago, 2015. Of course, on the capitalism is bad front, Dad makes the very fair point that him making a good living in advertising pays for all the things they have, including braces on those crooked little teeth. Bill pops in for a cup of coffee and talk turns to how Muriel plans to spend $7,000 to open up the place by knocking down a wall. Did they mention here if the landlord's going to allow them to do that? I might have missed it if they did say that. You just can't go getting someone to take out a wall in a place you're renting. Anyway, Bill knew about this remodeling scheme, but Jim is only finding out now, and he's agin it. He doesn't want to spend that much money, but Billy Boy retorts that he'd save more than $7,000 by not buying mink coats for Muriel and going on expensive vacations. He sounds like Bev's dad, only we've never spent bucks on minks, and our vacations were never that expensive, contrary to what I think he thinks. Plus, she drinks a lot of spark plug coffee. She's not spending all of our extra money on Starbucks and scones, just some of it. While at work, the Jimmer happens across a pamphlet that advertises houses in Connecticut. He gets inspired, thinking his money should go to a place of their own, a country of their own. No more apartment renting for this family. We finally bought into that idea in 2021, Bev and I did, after not thinking we could ever afford to buy a house, until the pandemic changed everything. It changed so many things, it changed this for us. Because our investments were hit hard like everyone else's were when the lockdown started in March, and I thought it would be years before my account would get back to where it was, if it ever did. But by the late summer of 2020, it was back to normal. I think I was actually ahead of things with my investments, proving that banking and money is just a great big crock. It's not real. It can't be real when the world was so messed up with the pandemic and everything. And I'm ahead? How is that possible? But Bev also started her cross-stitch business on Etsy, so we had extra money. We weren't spending it on vacations or just about anything else. So we gathered enough dollars to commit to a mortgage. Of course, then the interest rates went through the roof in, I think, 2022, was it? And our mortgage nearly doubled. Fun. I'm going to talk a little more throughout this episode about this whole experience that we've had, and that stress is one of the reasons I didn't laugh much at this movie. It's just too personal. Although as much as Jim and Muriel will eventually sink into their house to rebuild it, his $15,000 a year back then translates to something like $195,000 adjusted for inflation, so today's money. Ah, the 40s when you made so much more and things cost so much less. I'm sure the boomers would disagree with me, but they're wrong. Their real estate agent shows them the old Hackett place. Things have always been like this. It's always been hard with inflation and the rates or mortgages. It hasn't always been like this. You're wrong. Okay, so they get the old Hackett place, or at least they look at the old Hackett place, which is a couple hundred years old and very run down. It'll need a lot of work, although it's certainly spacious and it's away from the hustle and also the bustle. They'll get all kinds of acreage they don't even need. They have a barn out there. It's in the background. It's also about an hour from New York City, which the agent says is easy commuting distance. Wait, easy? An hour? Well, it could be worse, but an hour-long drive in the late 40s is a serious hike. What would that be now? With all the people on the roads now, what, an hour and a half? So easy. But still, Jim is loving the possibilities, and they way overspend on Shay Hackett, which Bill gives them grief about when they go back to the city to share the news. Bill wants them to get out of the deal when he sees they're only getting 35 acres, not the 50 acres they thought they were getting. But even that can't turn Jim off the plan. At first, Muriel agrees with Bill that this wasn't a good buy. I guess the lady of the house didn't have a say until now. Yet Jimmy used his heart, not his head, and you can't measure things you love in dollars and cents. His enthusiasm about owning his own land finally convinces Muriel about not my house, my 35 acres, but our house, our 35 acres. So Jim cashes in some bonds and gets a $6,000 mortgage, which was probably quite a bit back then, but it is a lot of land. Bill and the Blandings drive out there, but Jim keeps getting lost and coming across the same bridge, something like 3 different times. So funny. When they do finally find the house, Bill admits it's beautiful, but then, right on cue, pieces of the roof come falling off. Of course, a few falling shingles can't even come close to discouraging Jim, even if Bill is right back on the frowning, "Why did you buy this?" mode. They get a contractor to evaluate the situation, but his advice is to just tear it down. The house leans and it's going to fall right over one day. Really, truly does lean. It's the slanty shanty, as Bart Simpson would call it. But neither of the Blandings care, so they get second and third opinions, who also think they should level the place and start over. But architect Henry Sims, the Reginald Denny character, sees possibilities without bringing in a wrecking ball. Well, for now. Jim and Muriel make all kinds of changes to Sims's blueprints, wanting extra bathrooms and closets that not only aren't practical, but will really drive up the cost. And since they want all this extra stuff, they do need to tear it down, which they do. They're already $15,000 in with nothing but a vacant lot to show for it. $15,000 in the hole. The banter with Sims continues about how many bathrooms they'll have in the new build. Muriel insists on having 1 per bedroom, even if that's just not going to work. It's a little greedy. Having extra bathrooms, I get it. We only have 1 here, and they only have 1 obviously in an apartment. But she didn't even mention the one I would have to think on the main floor and then probably 1 in the basement. It's a lot of toilets. I think she said full bathrooms too, didn't she? So we're talking whole schmear, shower, bath, all that. But this whole bathroom talk got me thinking it's something more mature than most movies were allowed to be back then. The married couple can't sleep side by side. No, but at least this movie acknowledges that people use a toilet from time to time. Before Psycho, 12 years after this came out, a flushing toilet had never been shown in a major Hollywood film. You often would see a movie where they wouldn't show the toilet in the room at all, even if it had nothing to do with that. Maybe the scene was about the shower or the sink, and you wouldn't even see the toilet. As if we don't know there's a toilet in the bathroom. Did they think audiences are that childish? Oh, maybe they are. Maybe they were, maybe still are. Anyway, Bill shows up to announce that you can't bulldoze a house when the guy who holds your mortgage didn't agree to it, so the mortgagee is actually entitled to demand the entire amount right now, 6,000 clams. When Sim shows them just how much the house they want will cost, finally Jim decides that he wants out and says he's going to the owner of the apartment building so he can sign a 20-year lease. But when Muriel gets moony over the drawing Sims did of the place, if when it's ever finished, Jim's right back into believing in the dream. He didn't stop believing, oh, oh. So they pray that Sims can keep the cost down to the quote of 18,000, and construction begins. We get some fun with the guy who has to use dynamite to blast out some rocks, so more cost. Plus with Tasander, the guy who's digging their well. Yep. He keeps hitting rock, yet no H2O. Wait, wasn't there already a well on this property? What did the previous owners drink out of? Well, anyway, the exchange with Cary here is something like the "that's good, that's bad" conversation Homer has with the old guy in the curio shop in that Halloween episode of The Simpsons. It comes with a free Frogurt. That's good. A day or two passes, then Tasander does strike water, and he opens up a geyser because he broke through a spring. Pumps to get rid of the wet stuff aren't going to be available for a while either, and nothing else can happen in the basement until they get it out of there. But we were due for a montage. So we get one when they do manage to pump the water out, and the builders are really getting somewhere. Frame is up on the house now, the cement's obviously been poured. We're doing a lot better here. But more tomfoolery ensues when, after all the workers go home at noon on a Saturday, as they're supposed to, noon on a Saturday, Jim, Muriel, and Bill get stuck in a closet that Jim insists will open from the inside. He apparently has a trick way to turn the knob, but aren't there only two ways to turn a knob? I know you can jiggle it and all that kind of stuff, but it either goes left or right. Look at the ways I'm teaching you how to turn knobs here. Well, in any case, he wants all three of them to get in there to prove his point, which makes no sense, just in case he is wrong and they all get stuck in there. But overconfidence is like the Emperor in Star Wars, Jim's weakness, and they're trapped. Your faith in your friends is yours. Potter's obviously just going for a comedy beat here, as he almost always does. Appropriate for a supposedly funny movie, I guess. But they all seem pretty stupid to stay in that closet together. Why didn't Muriel say, I'm not going to get in there with you, or maybe Bill, what am I doing? But since all the workers split for the weekend, no one's going to get them out of there. So Jim smashes a window, which leads to the door easily swinging open. It was all about air pressure. Or maybe the new house already has ghosts. At least he won't have to climb over to some nearby scaffolding to get down to the ground, as he was going to do. Just like everything else in this flick, I didn't laugh at all this, but it was at least charming and cute. There's a subtext at this point, too, that Jim is jealous of how Muriel seems to be getting closer to their helpful buddy Bill. It feels like this comes out of nowhere, though, and it doesn't go anywhere. We'll come back to the will they, won't they angle later on. More promoting of things I'll talk about later on. Another odd turn is that they're forced to move into their house before it's ready because the guy who owns the apartment demands that they get out in 30 days. Can he do that? I guess you can do that. It seems out of nowhere. Seems arbitrary. There was a reason. I forget what Cary Grant said. But I guess the workmen busted heavy-duty booty, because it's not quite there yet, but the place is a lot closer to being ready to be lived in when the moving trucks bring the whole family, Bill, and their maid Gussie out to the house. So this woman who lives in the city with them is going to now work for them an hour away? Doesn't she have her own family, her own life? Do they pay her that well? She just can't find work in the city. Not enough people, I guess. Not enough options. There's a weird comic touch during this next bit when Melvyn Douglas does a voiceover instead of Cary Grant. What's said is what Jim would be thinking, but Bill says it. Comedy. So yeah, Bill speaks for Jim when Blandings tracks fresh varnish all over the floor. Fresh varnish. Shh. Then Bill even speaks for the girls, noticing that the windows in the back still aren't in place. There's been a mix-up in various forms of the name Blandings, like Landing and Blandsworth, all have each other's windows. And the money train keeps on rolling right over their heads just rolling right over their heads and steamrolling them because Sims says he had to buy them a water softener since the H2O on their property is so corrosive that it'll rust their pipes in no time without some help. God, after hearing that, would you want to drink it or bathe in it ever, even if it was softened? My parents had a water softener for many years, and I don't remember what would have happened if they didn't use it. If it would just be not the greatest, or if it would have been, this water's unusable, or at least it'll destroy your pipes. But if it would destroy the pipes, wouldn't it hurt you? And yeah, it's been fixed a little, but anyway, we drank it, so I guess it wasn't so bad. No, wait, we didn't drink our water. That's right, my mom would get it from the city. We used it to brush our teeth and cook and bathe. They didn't have time to paint before they had to move in, which is now Muriel's responsibility to work out. And this is one of the few scenes we've had so far that doesn't involve Cary Grant. She gives the guy all kinds of specific instructions, but the varnish guy's resolution when he hears this is, got it, blue, red, green, yellow, and white. And while she's trying to let them know about those specific colors that she's not going to get, we find out that Bill and Jim all this time were stuck in the closet again. Okay, now you're both proving to be pretty stupid. Did I let this happen again? But I'll tell you, the door handle will work this time. I know it will. The bad news continues when Jim finds out that he's got to get up before dawn to go to work, something you think he would have looked into long before now. Distance from work has always been a big factor for us whenever we've moved anywhere. We've had to move together 4 times, I guess it is, and it always mattered. She wants to ride her bike, and I used to ride my bike. While unpacking, the girls find their mother's diary and discover in there that Bill and Muriel were a bit of an item way back in the day. Plus they find one of his monogrammed cufflinks when Mom's jewel box spills things out. Jim's irritability continues when he has to share a bathroom with Muriel while shaving that night, partly because he's now full-on green with envy about Muriel and Bill. She says she did love him back in the day, but she was also in love with a lot of guys back then. But she married Jim because he's the love of her life. In fact, she has rational explanations for all of his issues. Plus, Jim probably should see that Bill never seems to have much romantic interest in her. He's too cool for school to go chasing his friend's wife. And he's, I hope, a loyal friend. So they make up enough that it looks like they're about to get all bumpy in the boudoir, until she reminds him that he has to get up at 5 a.m. That's why he was shaving at night. He needs his rest. And for some reason, they have to lay on cots on the ground, or sleeping bags or something. But they had beds when the movie started. Moving trucks brought all their stuff out there. What gives? I know the answer is it's supposed to be funny, but either make logical sense or be a lot funnier. Why are they on cots? Why are they on cots? They were wearing coats in the house during all that brouhaha since there were so many open windows, but quite a bit of time passes, and Bill's VO here talks about how it's almost fall now. That must have been one cold summer. At least that one night when they were wearing those winter coats. I know the windows are open, but still. A bad storm hits one night and the girls are stranded at someone else's house, while Jim wasn't going to come home anyway because he's swamped with work. Bill, meanwhile, was visiting Muriel before Jim was due to get home, and because of all the rain and everything and the roads being closed, he wonders where he'll stay that night, considering the weather is going to strand him in the country. Of course, she insists he'll sleep there, but importantly, his reputation will be just as unsullied as it was before, because nothing romantic is going to happen. Story of his life. Jim doesn't know about this scene, but we know that the two of them didn't mess around when they had this kind of opportunity, so they obviously never will. Jim, meanwhile, has to pull an all-nighter at the office, trying to come up with a slogan for Wham Ham, only problems with the house was consuming all of his attention. Were consuming? Problems were consuming. Yeah. He tries out a bunch of bad ideas in his secretary in the early morning. She's barely even awake, not even realizing he's so tired that he's repeating the slogans of other products, only putting ham in the place of the real product. They don't say this, but it'd be like saying, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving ham. But after spotting photos of his wife and his daughters on his desk, he decides he's had enough of being away from them, so even though he's deep in hawk, he takes off and goes home. And if the boss fires him for not finishing the work, which he really should do, he'll just look for a job somewhere else. Back when it was just so easy to find some other job that pays you this well. Jim gets home right around the time Sims drops by with a stack of bills that morning after that big storm, some of which are just for a few bucks at least. But there's also a pricey one for Mrs. Blandings' little flower sink. There's a whole big stink about that, since Muriel thought she was just asking the workman to do something simple, but it wasn't. And this is when Bill comes down in a robe, saying he slept great. Gussie wasn't there, and neither were the kids, so it was just Muriel and their sarcastic friend alone in the house. What goes on here? But Potter doesn't really do anything with this plot thread, which has been building up for quite a few scenes now. They basically drop it after this scene. Bill had the verve to spend so much time around his friend's wife, and he should have known Jim wouldn't be thrilled about it, but he kept doing it. None of this seems necessary, especially when you don't really pay it off. And I guess they have an infidelity subplot in The Money Pit, too, the remake with Hanks and Shelley Long. Anyway, Sims keeps on talking about the money they still owe, and Jim finally flips out. He doesn't love the house, he hates it, and he wants to sell. He misses their old life, when they had money in the bank, his kids loved him, and he could trust his wife. Plus, he still had a job. It looks like the guy who was digging that well is going to make him even madder when he shows up, but DeSander shows up to announce that there's a matter of $12.36, only he owes them. It isn't much, but at least it isn't money going out. And he thinks they sure have a pretty place here. Yep. So Jim isn't so sure about selling anymore, and Bill helps him feel miles better about it when he announces that maybe there are some things you buy with your heart, not your head. He regrets always being so negative in the voice of reason, since they did end up with a pretty nice house after all. Jim's spirits are way up now, but then his job is saved when Gussie tells the kids they're not going to eat ham for breakfast. It's Wham! She insists, if you ain't eating Wham, you ain't eating ham. So Jim has his hook. He even wants Muriel to give this creative servant a $10 raise. Maybe the creative servant should get a lot more than $10 extra a month for thinking up this slogan that I think is supposed to have been very successful. But okay, she gets something out of it at least. We wrap things up when we see Gussie dressed like old mammy, in an ad for the ham, with those 9 lucrative words about eating Wham emblazoned on the page. If you ain't eating Wham, you ain't eating ham. Jim is shown sitting outside his finally finished home, reading the Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House book. And Cary Grant breaks the fourth wall after that little bit of meta. Is this meta? Suggesting to the audience to drop in and see us sometime. Drop in and see us sometime. Melvyn Douglas agrees, yeah, do that, while pouring coffee, Mr. Cynical, of course, still, and Muriel just beams while sitting beside her husband. And that's that. You know, this ending epitomizes Myrna Loy's role in this movie. She's in plenty of scenes, and she's talented enough that it didn't bother me much while watching it, but prepping these notes got me thinking that she's such a secondary character in her own marriage. And maybe that's just the way it was for men and women back then. I think it probably was. The man made decisions and the wife either agreed or kept her mouth shut. Or they fought about it, I guess, and he probably still won. And I can't say Lloyd was wasted in the movie. She's in most of the film, but she sure wasn't utilized very well. And I guess the title being Mr., not Mr. and Mrs., tells us all we need to know about how everyone viewed the wife in this film, and in the book for that matter. As for that drop in and see us button, okay, yeah, it's a cute way to end the film. Breaking the fourth wall wasn't common back then either, so that was a creative touch. Except clearly their problems aren't over. They're deep in debt, and the house still had a long way to go when they moved in. That was just going to cost more money. Plus, what about the whole infidelity thing? Jim was suspicious of them right up until he wasn't. But nothing was resolved. They should have just ditched it. It's not a long movie, but slicing 5 or 6 minutes out of all that material would have been wise. Although maybe that angle was the only way to keep Melvyn Douglas interested in being in this. Maybe that was it. If he could even dictate which roles he took in the 40s or what he got to do in those roles. I'm not sure he had that kind of clout like Cary Grant would have had. As for the story and the hijinks that ensue, I just wish the whole thing was funnier. The Money Pit wasn't exactly a brilliant comedy, but it sure was memorable how much that disaster drives Tom Hanks over the edge. They take things way further than Mr. Blandings does, with staircases completely collapsing, for one thing. Of course, I guess they don't level the old house in that film the way they do here. They're dealing with the death trap the whole time, while the old death trap is knocked down early on in Blandings. One great moment in the Money Pit that this movie doesn't have, and I gotta talk about it, is when Hanks ends up stepping on a rug, not knowing there was a hole in the floor right where he steps. So he slides down into the hole while inside the carpet and hanging between the floors. And I believe it's all night. I think he gets stuck there and maybe Shelley Long finds him the next morning. I haven't seen that film in a very long time, but I recall that scene being very funny. Plus, I may have mentioned before my cousin Jason, who committed suicide, I believe was a fan of that movie too. So there's a bit of a thing there, right? Like I've talked about Robin Williams. He was a fan of his. So I like Robin even more now in retrospect because he was a fan of his. I was too, but he really was. Same with this movie. And this, Blandings that is, ended up being the 72nd funniest film ever on the AFI list. What were their voters smoking? I'm not saying Money Pit should have made the list, but it wasn't even nominated, and it was funnier than this is. Although I might not speak of even that so highly if I saw it today. Both films are more of a nightmare than they are comedies, especially considering Bev and I have been down some similar roads. Nothing nearly as bad as the movies have, because of course they're over the top because they're movies, but we had to sink some huge bucks into a few things we didn't anticipate when we bought our place. Fix a pillar that cost $7,000, I believe. Fix the plumbing out front. Have a dead tree cut down. And that's when the interest rates on our mortgage were just killing us. So I just didn't find this thing amusing enough to do more than smile a bit. I don't think I LOL'd a single time. But this topic has been taken up by Hollywood more than once with Money Pit as a remake. Ice Cube and Nia Long played similar characters about 20 years ago in Are We Done Yet? That movie wasn't a giant blockbuster, but it did relatively okay that year. So did the Hanks flick in '86, Money Pit, which brought in more ticket buyers than classic films like Hannah and Her Sisters and Hoosiers, 2 films I prefer more, but Money Pit made more money. Neither of them is close to the respect on Rotten Tomatoes that Mr. Blandings does, though. Are We Done Yet, especially, got scorched by the critics. For that matter, this topic of moving out to the sticks and renovating or building a dream house was done even before Cary and Myrna did it. A Jack Benny comedy in '42 called George Washington Slept Here apparently had similar material, and it was even nominated for an Oscar for its sets. It doesn't have a rating on Rotten Tomatoes, though, so I can't report that. Okay, so the cast. This marks our 10th Cary Grant episode. We're talking pretty legendary flicks like She Done Him Wrong, The Awful Truth, Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, The Philadelphia Story, No, Notorious, The Bishop's Wife, The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, and North by Northwest. I've learned to appreciate this guy more than I did when I first started catching some of these classic movies he was in. He didn't have incredible range, but he knew what he could do best on screen, usually comedy and classiness and joie de vivre, that kind of thing. Certainly looked great in a suit. But he also didn't keep going back to the comedy well over and over again and just do that. Case in point, he did quite a few thrillers with Hitch. They tended to have a sense of humor, sure, but they certainly weren't wacky comedies like this or Arsenic and Old Lace. I'm not criticizing if that's all he ever did anyway. He was very good at that. A lot of successful films there, but even The Bishop's Wife is more serious and contemplative than it is hysterically funny. Looking at Grant's 1940s, by the way, it was a fascinating decade for him. He started with one of the greatest comedies of all time, His Girl Friday, in 1940, not to mention The Philadelphia Story and My Favorite Wife that year. Then he did Suspicion and Notorious with Hitchcock in the next several years, plus Arsenic and Old Lace, Bachelor, Bishops, and his only 2 Oscar nominations came in that 10-year span, for Penny Serenade in 1941 and None But the Lonely Heart in 1944. That was a flat-out drama, as I recall, too, not a thriller even, just a drama. So that was rare for him to do. Of course, he was in wonderful things in the 30s and the 50s, too, and I think even the 60s. I forget when he stopped acting. But his run in the 40s was just sensational. As for Myrna Loy, we've covered her work 5 times now. I'm counting as one of those 5 her tiny role as a chorus girl in The Jazz Singer. Then she went on to be the second lead in The Thin Man, playing Nora Charles opposite William Powell's Nick Charles. The Thin Man, I liked that movie, but didn't laugh that much at it, but those two are great together. So those films have been yapped about around here, but we also talked about her in The Best Years of Our Lives. And of course, she was Cary Grant's love interest in The Bachelor and The Bobby Soxer. I like Myrna Loy. She's not Miss Range any more than Cary Grant is Mr. Range, but she did what she did very well. In this and plenty of other things, I like her a lot. Melvyn Douglas has been discussed on this channel 3 previous times. He won 2 supporting actor Oscars. We covered these 2 films, HUD and Being There. Love HUD. I'm going to see it again soon. It's been a while. Then, of course, there was Ninotchka, where he and Greta Garbo made fun lovers and comedy partners. If you've never seen Ninotchka, put it on your list. That's a truly funny movie from the old days. Reginald Denny, the guy who plays the architect Sims, got started back in the silent era, but then went on to be in Hitchcock's Rebecca, which we talked about back in Oscar month a few months ago. He was also in Cat Ballou, which I hashed out on my own a few years ago. Connie Marshall plays Betsy Blandings, and Sharon Moffat plays Joan. Moffat only worked into the 50s, quitting acting when she was still a teenager. She was in something like 15 films. Marshall was in more like 23, with one of them being Dragonwyck with Gene Tierney. She too stopped acting in the 50s when she was only about 20 years old. As for the maid, Gussie was played by Louise Beavers, and what a great name, Louise Beavers. She worked a lot over the course of about 30 years. She was almost always playing maids and housekeepers and house servants, but as Hattie McDaniel said, that's better than being a housekeeper. One of the big titles in her resume is She Done Him Wrong with a very young Cary Grant. Their director was H.C. Potter. The H.C. stands for Henry Codman, and not surprisingly, friends called him Hank. Of course, if you just called him Henry Potter, well, that's the name of the bad guy in It's a Wonderful Life. This Potter came before the fictional character did, though, obviously, so his parents weren't diabolical fans of the man who stole $8,000 from George Bailey. George Bailey. And then named their kid after him. Because that would be weird. But they didn't, and they couldn't have. The timing didn't work out. I've seen a few other Potter films, Mr. Potter, like The Farmer's Daughter and Hell's a Poppin', not to mention Mr. Lucky with Cary Grant, but we haven't reviewed any of his works before this. The only things in his awards section on the IMDb, no Oscar nominations of any kind, are that he was made an honorary life member of the Directors Guild of America in 1977, and his star was added to the Walk of Fame in 1960. Melvin Frank and Norman Panama wrote this. They and Norman Krasna were the men behind one of Bev's favorite holiday flicks, White Christmas. I'm dreaming. They also, not dreaming in August and September, no, I'm not dreaming. They also wrote the Danny Kaye comedy The Court Jester, which was 98th on AFI's Top 100 Laughs, and they were nominated for Oscars together on one of those many Hope and Crosby comedies, Road to Utopia. They also worked with Danny Kaye again by writing and directing Knock on Wood, and then Frank directed Bob Hope and Lucille Ball in The Facts of Life. Both of them produced and or directed plenty of other films, although Panama didn't do as much of that as Frank did. Their script was based on Eric Hodgins' 1946 book, which in turn came from a short story in Fortune magazine called Mr. Blandings Builds His Castle. Castle's a good word, but Dreamhouse is better. The producers were Panama, Frank, and Dory Sherry. I think I've said Scary before, but I guess it is Sherry. Anyway, Dory won an Oscar for writing the original story for Boys Town, Spencer Tracy movie, that he won an Oscar for too, I believe. He also had quite a few nominations for documentaries in the feature and short subjects categories. But I think of him more as a producer, and he did that job for The Bachelor and The Bobby Soxer, for instance. Speaking of producing this, the production, I read that the studio built houses just like this around the country as a way to promote the flick. I guess many of those places are still standing even, and worth a lot of money these days. The one they actually use as the Blandings house is in fact still out there in the hills near Malibu. The film was set in Connecticut and New York, of course, but they did in fact film in the countryside outside Hollywood. Well, most of it. Obviously the stock footage from New York is in New York. And they started shooting not that long after Bachelor and The Bobby Soxer came out. So maybe they fast-tracked this once that was so popular. Strike while the Cary Myrna rom-com iron is pretty hot. James Wong Howe was the cinematographer. He won 2 Oscars in his long, great career, one of which was for HUD. But Howe also shot The Thin Man, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Body and Soul, Sweet Smell of Success, and the live-action sequences in Fantasia, all movies that have been talked about on this channel over the years. Howe was working in the 1:37:1 aspect ratio, naturally, since widescreen was still several years away. The flick is black and white, and I saw a spotty print on TCM. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't awesome. I read that there's a colorized version. Avoid that. They never should have done any of that stuff. I think it was a Ted Turner initiative, so Turner Classic Movies, hats off, kudos for that idea. But coloring old movies, no, don't do it. Or they shouldn't have done it. Harry Marker was the editor. He cut many reputable old flicks, but we've never covered his work before. He did get nominated for cutting The Bells of St. Mary's, the sequel to a movie we did cover, I think last year, in fact, Going My Way. It's spelled Harline, but I think it's pronounced Harlan. So Lee Harlan, or Harline, who won Oscars for the song When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio, plus the score from that movie. Also, he composed the music for the very first feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Lee got an Oscar nomination for The Pride of the Yankees, too, and he worked on Bambi, The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, and Pick Up on South Street. We have reviewed all of those at one point or another, and that's a lot of great films. Well, as for some last thoughts, well, this was a mostly congenial 90-ish minutes, but I just didn't laugh. Plus, there was a nightmare factor of this hitting a bit too close to home for me. Hey, if you watch this and spend your time LOLing, I'm glad for you, but I think for this to make me show some teeth, they needed to make the disaster more of a disaster. A lot of this just seems like the kind of stuff people would really go through if they were buying a house and had to level it and rebuild, or even just rebuilt a house that was still standing. So make it sillier. Do what the money pit did. Make it over-the-top ridiculous. Go for a cartoon, effectively. I do like Grant and Lloyd together, but I just can't quite recommend their work this time. So that was how I saw Mr. Blandings builds his dream house. I'll give you the lowdown about future episodes and also how to talk back to us in a bit, but this is always the point in a solo show when I throw out some trivia, and the theme is comedy actors and their names. The first two questions are about people well known for being funny and also have the same last name, and the third one is about the star of today's movie, who was also well known for being funny. So question number 1, who did Joseph Buster Keaton tell us gave him the nickname Buster? Was it Teddy Roosevelt, Pablo Picasso, or Harry Houdini? Question number 2, what is Michael Keaton's real last name? It's not Keaton. And question number 3, Cary Grant's real name was Archibald Leach. I'm Archie Leach. Which comedy that we've covered had a character who was called Archie Leach? Maybe there have been a lot of Archie Leaches in movies and paying homage to him with his real name, but we covered one. It's a classic. What was it? Okay, those answers are imminent. But first, I will tell you that the next time I talk to you in a solo show will be in 2 weeks. Not surprisingly, that's the way this works, doesn't it? I said back in August that I was planning to cover 5 easy pieces in this slot today. Well, I'll get to Bob Rafelson's finest film on September 19th instead. Jack Nicholson established himself as a leading man 1 year after his breakout performance as a supporting player in Easy Rider, and I'll talk about how great he is in 5 easy pieces in 2 weeks. But before I rave about that, Bev and I will have an episode in 3 days, and on Monday the 8th, the topic will be something far different than either 5 easy pieces or Mr. Blandings. It's The Elephant Man, David Lynch's first major movie after his art film Eraserhead blew people's minds, at least those who saw it. Not everyone saw that movie because it was an art film. If you enjoyed this episode today or any of the episodes we do, tell me so, tell us so. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Write a review too. Of course, subscribe to always keep up to date in our doings. And look for us on YouTube. It's just the audio with the graphic, but I keep hearing how more and more the tube is how people are consuming shows like this. Our channel is at HYES Ellis on YouTube. Comment, like, etc. on that popular site. You can get in touch with us by email. The address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Our social media stuff involves Twix and Blue Sky. We're at MovieFiend51 and at Bev Ellis Ellis on Elon's Cytotoxicity. And we're Ryan-Ellis and Bev Ellis Ellis, no at for her, on the less hate-filled Blue Sky. Well, for now. It'll be hate-filled one day. And for the love of Cary Grant, order Sparkplug Coffee. Our listeners can only do this one time, but they can get a one-time 20% discount. Just toss HYES into the appropriate box when you're finishing up an order, and you'll save some dollars. The website, you ask? It's sparkplug.coffee/HYES. And before I say adios, I need to reveal those trivia answers. They weren't very hard, and I think maybe all 3 of them came up in prior podcasts about Buster Keaton, Michael Keaton, and Cary Grant. Anyway, question number 1. Who did Joseph Buster Keaton say gave him the nickname Buster? Teddy Roosevelt, Pablo Picasso, Harry Houdini? He claimed it was the magic man, Harry Houdini, that called him Buster Keaton. Question number 2. What is Michael Keaton's real last name? It's Douglas. The Guild wouldn't let him be that because there's a Michael Douglas already, obviously. So he went with Keaton to honor Diane Keaton, not Buster. They're not related, of course, since he was Douglas, but she wasn't even a Keaton anyway. Her real last name is Hall. Maybe she was homaging Buster Keaton when she chose that, I don't know. Or maybe she married somebody. I don't know if she married a guy named Keaton. And question number 3. Cary Grant's real name was Archibald Leach. Which comedy that we have covered had a character who was called Archie Leach? It was a fish called Wanda. And yes, John Cleese was paying homage to Grant. It wasn't just a coincidence. So that's it for another solo show. Thanks for being part of it. Join us on Monday when we review The Terrible Elephant Man. Meanwhile, I'm going to go get locked in a room and bang a thing on the ground until somebody comes to help. I bet no one will be laughing when I do that, though. And cut.